Memphis, 1956. The summer air hung thick and heavy, smelling of honeysuckle and the Mississippi River. Inside Graceland, a cool breeze drifted through the grand rooms. Courtesy of the state-of-the-art air conditioning unit Elvis Presley had recently installed. Elvis. Then just 21, but already a force of nature and music, sprawled on a plush velvet couch, strumming his guitar. His hips might have been still, but his mind was buzzing, 1,000 melodies vying for attention. His cousin Jean leaned against the doorframe, munching on a peanut butter and banana sandwich. "Another one, Elvis. You're going to wear that poor guitar out." Elvis chuckled, his deep blue eyes sparkling. "Nah, Jean, she's got more songs in her than I've dreamed up yet. Besides, what else am I going to do? Colonel's got me on a short leash after that last show in Vegas." Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's enigmatic manager, walked in just then, a stack of envelopes in his hand. He was a man who moved like a shadow, always appearing exactly when you least expected him, or most needed him, or in Elvis's case, when he was just starting to relax. "Speak of the devil," Elvis muttered, grinning. Colonel merely grunted, his round face unreadable as ever. "Elvis, my boy, you're a sensation, a phenomenon, and with that comes obligations." He fanned the envelopes. "Invitations, galas, charity events, they all want a piece of a king." Elvis rolled his eyes good-naturedly. "King, Colonel? Last I checked, I was still just Elvis, a boy from Tupelo, who got lucky with a guitar. Humility is a virtue, Elvis, but don't overdo it, now the braid." And now picked out a thick cream-colored envelope with an ornate seal. "Is important the anderteal, as in Tortu. Preferred the greasy spoon diner down the street, or a late-night jam session with his band." He liked real people, not folks who talked about money and status all night. He opened the card. The calligraphy was elaborate, the paper thick, spoke of old money, of traditions he didn't quite understand. "Mr. Presley," he read aloud, a slight southern drawl stretching the words, "your presence would be an honor." He skimmed the rest. Black tie, dinner, dancing, the usual. "Colonel, you know I hate these things. All those stiff suits and even stiffer conversations. I can't even tap my foot without someone giving me the evil eye." "That's precisely why you go, Elvis," the colonel said, his voice firm. "To show them that you're not just some rock and roll hooligan. You're a respectable young man, a philanthropist, a patriot, and besides," he added, a twinkle in his eye, "there'll be plenty of pretty young ladies there who'd be mighty impressed by a man in uniform, even if it's just a tuxedo." Elvis let out a long sigh, running a hand through his perfectly coiffed hair. He knew the colonel was right in his own way. His career was exploding, and with that came a spotlight that shone on more than just his music. People watched him, judged him. He had to play the game at least a little. "All right, Colonel," he conceded, "but you're coming with me, and no talking about my sales figures all night." The colonel merely smiled. "A rare sight. Wouldn't dream of it, son. Now I've taken the liberty of arranging a new tuxedo for you. And mind your manners, no chewing gum." Elvis just shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. He knew he was in for a long night. Later that evening, after the colonel had departed, Elvis sat on his porch swing, looking out at the twilight descending over Graceland. The sounds of crickets chirping and a distant train whistle filled the air. He thought about the party, all those important people. He felt a familiar knot of unease. He'd never forgotten where he came from. The simple life, the struggles. He'd never forgotten the people who truly mattered. His mind drifted to the rhythm and blues clubs he'd sneak into as a teenager on Beale Street. The raw, powerful music, the incredible talent of the black musicians. They were the ones who had really taught him how to sing, how to feel the music in his bones. He remembered sitting in juke joints mesmerized by the guitar, wrists the soulful voices. He remembered the kindness of the musicians who shared their knowledge, their passion, their music. He also remembered the looks, the unspoken rules, the way society tried to keep people apart. He'd never understood it. Music didn't see color. Soul didn't see color. Why did people a thought solidified in his mind? He wasn't just going to this party for the Colonel or for his image. He was going as Elvis the kid from Tupelo, who loved music more than anything. The kid who knew that talent and kindness came in all shades. If anyone at that fancy party dared to forget that, he'd be sure to remind them he wasn't just a singer. He was a man with a heart, and that heart belonged to everyone who loved music, everyone who believed in fairness. He owed it to the people who had inspired him to show that he stood for something more than just fame. He stood up, his resolve hardening. He wasn't going to just attend, he was going to be there, all of him. And if that meant a little discomfort for the high society crowd, then so be it. The night of the governor's charity ball arrived cool and clear, a welcome reprieve from the day's heat. Elvis, feeling a bit like a penguin in his tailored tuxedo, stepped out of the black Cadillac, the flashbulbs of waiting photographers exploding around him. A murmur rippled through the small crowd gathered behind a velvet rope. His name was whispered, then shouted. He offered a quick, practiced smile and a wave, then disappeared into the grand ballroom of the Peabody Hotel. The ballroom was a dazzling spectacle. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto polished marble floors, reflecting the glimmer of expensive jewelry worn by the ladies in their elaborate gowns. Men in tuxedos, like him, clustered in small groups, their voices a low hum of polite conversation. The air smelled of perfume, cigars, and polished wood. Elvis felt an immediate jolt of being out of place. He was used to the roar of a crowd, the vibrating floor of a concert hall, the sweaty energy of a recording studio. This was different, too quiet, too refined. He felt like a wild bird caged, even if the cage was gilded. Colonel Parker, already working the room like a seasoned politician, nudged him forward. "Circulate, Elvis Mingle. Make an impression." Elvis did his best. He shook hands, offered polite answers to questions about his latest records, and even managed a few genuine smiles, but his eyes kept scanning the room, looking for something real. He felt a longing for the familiar faces of his band of Scotty Moore and Bill Black, who truly understood the language he spoke. He noticed some people staring, not with admiration, but with a kind of reserved curiosity, almost skepticism. They were the ones who probably thought rock and roll was just noise and Elvis a passing fad. He could almost hear their silent judgments, and it pricked at him. He was tired of being pigeonholed. He moved towards a less crowded corner, near a large window overlooking the street. He saw a familiar face, a man he recognized from Beale Street, a gifted jazz trumpet player named Marcus Blues Johnson. Marcus was a few years older than Elvis, with kind eyes and a laugh that could fill a room. Elvis had often watched Marcus play, absorbing every note, every nuanced improvisation. Marcus was wearing a clean-pressed suit, but he looked a little out of place too, perhaps serving drinks or assisting the catering staff, rather than being a guest. Elvis felt a surge of warmth. Marcus wasn't a celebrity, but he was a true artist, a cornerstone of the Memphis music scene. Without thinking twice, Elvis walked straight over to him. "Marcus," Elvis said, his voice carrying just enough to draw a few curious glances. He extended his hand, a wide, genuine smile spreading across his face. "Man, it's good to see you here." Marcus's eyes widened in surprise, then softened into a smile of his own. He quickly wiped his hand on his apron before shaking Elvis's hand firmly. "Elvis, well, didn't expect to see you mingling in this crowd. Same to you." Elvis chuckled, lowering his voice slightly. "Though you look a sight more comfortable than I feel in this monkey suit," Marcus laughed, a deep, warm sound. "It's a job, you know, good gig, good tips, but it ain't Beale Street, that's for sure." "Tell me about it," Elvis agreed, a wistful note in his voice. "I miss those nights. Just the music. No fuss, no fancy speeches." They chatted for a few minutes, talking about music, about the changing Memphis scene, about old friends. It was a brief, authentic connection in a room full of polite artifice. Elvis felt his shoulders relax a little. This was the real Memphis, the one he loved, This was where the soul was. As they spoke, Elvis noticed a few of the important guests looking over their expressions, a mix of surprise and mild disapproval. One woman in a shimmering gown actually sniffed dismissively. Elvis ignored them. He didn't care. He was talking to a friend, a peer in the true sense of the word. Just then, the colonel appeared at his elbow, a faint frown on his face. "Elvis, my boy, there's someone important I want you to meet, Mr. Sterling. He's a very influential man, a big supporter of the arts and a potential investor in some of our future projects." Colonel's eyes flickered. To Marcus, a subtle message of wrap it up. Elvis gave Marcus a quick, reassuring squeeze on the shoulder. "Good seeing you, Marcus. We gotta catch up properly sometime soon, maybe hit a jam session." Marcus's smile broadened. "You know where to find me, Elvis. Always a seat for you at the table." As Elvis allowed the colonel to guide him away, he glanced back. Marcus gave him a slight nod, a silent acknowledgement of their shared understanding. It solidified Elvis's earlier resolve. He belonged to no single world, no single group. His world was music, and music was for everyone. And if anyone in this room of stiff shirts and polite smiles forgot that, he'd be sure to remind them. He'd grown up around all kinds of people, learned from all kinds of people. He wasn't about to forget that now. Colonel led Elvis towards a cluster of well-dressed men, one of whom was a portly, distinguished-looking gentleman with silver hair and an air of self-importance. This was Mr. Sterling, as the colonel had mentioned. He had a firm handshake and a booming voice, and immediately launched into a monologue about the importance of traditional values and good, wholesome entertainment. Elvis tried to listen politely, but his mind kept drifting. He found Mr. Sterling's words stiff, like old furniture that creaked when you sat on it. He missed the raw honesty of Marcus's voice, the genuine passion. Mr. Presley Sterling boomed, turning his attention fully to Elvis. "It's a pleasure to finally meet the young man causing such a stir. Your music's certainly energetic, a bit loud for my tastes, perhaps, but one cannot deny its appeal to the younger generation." Elvis just nodded. Not wanting to get drawn into a debate about the merits of rock and roll, he'd had that conversation a million times. However, Sterling continued, his voice dropping slightly. "One does wonder about the influences, doesn't one? All that rhythm and blues, it's certainly catchy, but one must be careful not to dilute the purity of American music. Wouldn't you agree?" Elvis's smile tightened. The veiled references to black music, the insinuation that it was somehow lesser or unclean. "Sir," Elvis began, choosing his words carefully, "I believe music is music. Good music, no matter where it comes from, speaks to the soul. And American music, to my mind, is a mix of everything blues, country, gospel. It's all part of the same tapestry." Mr. Sterling chuckled, a dry, dismissive sound. "Well," said young man, very diplomatic, "but let us be franks. Some of these influencers are best kept in their proper place. One does not invite every street corner performer into the grand concert hall, do they? There is a certain decorum." The words were mild enough on the surface, but the meaning was clear. Mr. Sterling wasn't talking about decorum, he was talking about race. He was talking about keeping people in their place. "I think," Elvis said, his voice a little lower now, "that some of the finest music I've ever heard came from those street corners. As you put it, talented people this country has ever produced." He thought of B.B. King, of Big Mama Thornton, of Sister Rosetta Tharpe, the people who had laid the groundwork for everything he did. Mr. Sterling waved a dismissive hand. Yes, some of it has a certain primitive charm, but we must remember it's not for everyone, and frankly, to suggest that it's equal to the great works of our classical composers, or even our most respected folk artists. Interestingly, one must maintain standards. Other people in the group shifted uncomfortably, some avoiding eye contact, others nodding subtly in agreement with Sterling. The colonel, sensing the shift in atmosphere, cleared his throat. A warning signal. But Elvis wasn't listening to the colonel. He was listening to the echo of Sterling's words, the thinly veiled prejudice. It wasn't just an opinion. It was an attack on something Elvis held sacred: music and the people who made it. It was an attack on the very soul of Memphis, on the blend of cultures that had created something new and vibrant. Thought of Marcus Johnson serving drinks just minutes ago. He thought of the countless black musicians who would pour their hearts into their craft, often without recognition or fair pay, simply because of the color of their skin. And here was this man, in his expensive suit, dismissing it all with a wave of his hand. A slow burn began in Elvis's chest. It wasn't just anger. It was a deep sense of injustice. He looked Mr. Sterling squarely in the eye. The polite smile had vanished from his face, replaced by a steely gaze that few people dared to challenge. "Mr. Sterling," Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm, cutting through the genteel chatter of the room like a sharp knife, "I respectfully disagree completely." The conversation around them seemed to dim, as if the very air had thickened with tension. The other men in the group exchanged uneasy glances. Mr. Sterling's confident smile faltered. Not like this, not so directly. Elvis wasn't just a singer anymore. In that moment, he was a son of the South, a product of its diverse sounds, standing up for what he knew was right. His roots were deep, intertwined with the very music Mr. Sterling was trying to diminish, and he wasn't about to let that stand. The silence that followed Elvis's quiet but firm declaration was deafening. Mr. Sterling, clearly unused to being contradicted, especially by someone he likely considered a mere entertainer, blinked slowly. His smile, which had been patronizing just moments before, now wavered. "Disagree, Mr. Presley?" Sterling finally managed his voice, taking on a sharper edge. "On what grounds are you suggesting that the music originating from certain parts of town is on par with, say, the anthems of our nation or the timeless melodies of Broadway?" Elvis felt a surge of heat, a familiar rush of adrenaline that usually preceded a high-energy performance. But this wasn't a stage. This was a fight for respect, for truth. He took a small step closer to Mr. Sterling, his posture straightening, his blue eyes unwavering. "What matters is the heart behind it, the truth in the notes, the feeling it gives you." He paused, letting his words sink in. Around them, other guests had started to notice the tension had subtly turned. The low hum of conversation in their immediate vicinity died out completely. Even the colonel, usually quick to intervene, stood frozen, perhaps recognizing that this was a moment Elvis had to face on his own. "You talk about purity of American music," Elvis continued, his voice gaining a quiet intensity. "It's built on the backs of artists, black and white, who pour their souls into their instruments long before I ever picked up a guitar." He saw a flicker of annoyance, perhaps even anger, in Mr. Sterling's eyes. The man was clearly unaccustomed to having his worldview challenged so directly. One of the other gentlemen in the group, a thin man with a nervous twitch, cleared his throat. "Now, Elvis," he began. "Attempting a conciliatory merely means that there are appropriate venues for certain types of cultural expression. One simply maintains a standard of decorum at such an event as this." Elvis turned his gaze to the nervous man. "Decorum?" he asked, a hint of steel in his voice. "Is it decorous to dismiss a whole group of people and their immense contributions just because of their skin color? Is it decorous to pretend that the music that runs through the very veins of this country, the music that built my career, is somehow less valuable than any other?" He looked back at Mr. Sterling, who was now visibly flustered. "These weren't primitive charms, sir. They were pioneers. They were masters. And to suggest otherwise is not just wrong. It's disrespectful to a legacy that deserves more than your casual dismissal." A few more people had edged closer, drawn by the unusual silence and the tension in the air. Their faces showed a mixture of shock, fascination, and perhaps grudging admiration. No one at such a high society event usually spoke with such raw honesty, especially not to someone of Mr. Sterling's stature. Mr. Sterling, recovering slightly, puffed out his chest. "Mr. Presley, you are a young man, passionate perhaps, but clearly lacking in the understanding of the nuances of society. There are lines, distinctions that must be drawn for the good of for the good of everyone." He gestured vaguely with his hand, as if trying to push away an unpleasant smell. Elvis's jaw tightened. "And frankly, you're missing out on a lot of what makes my music and America's music so special." The directness of his words, stripped of any pretense, seemed to hit Mr. Sterling like a physical blow. The old man's face flushed crimson. Polite facade had completely crumbled, revealing the ugly truth beneath. Elvis had not only challenged him, he had exposed him, and he wasn't done yet. Mr. Sterling's face was a mottled red. His eyes narrowed into slits. "Mr. Presley," he sputtered, his voice rising, "you are speaking out of turn. You are a performer, not a social commentator. Perhaps you should stick to your rock and roll and leave matters of culture and society to those who truly understand them." He tried to dismiss Elvis with a contemptuous wave of his hand, clearly attempting to regain control of the situation and reassert his perceived authority. But Elvis wasn't a man to be dismissed. The fire in his eyes burned brighter. "Sir," he retorted, his voice surprising calm, "despite the rising tension, my music is a part of culture, and so are the people who created the sounds that inspired me. People you seem so quick to dismiss. This isn't just about music, is it? When I was growing up, I spent hours listening to the radio, sneaking into juke joints. I heard the passion, the raw talent in the blues clubs on Beale Street. I saw people expressing their joy. You talk about standards, Mr. Sterling. Is it a standard to belittle a whole segment of our society? Is it a standard to look down on someone just because their skin is a different shade than yours? Because if it is, then it's a standard I want no part of." His words rang with conviction, carrying across the hushed room. More and more people were now openly staring, some looking shocked, others, particularly younger faces, looking intrigued or even quietly approving. The Colonel, surprisingly, still hadn't moved, seemingly allowing Elvis this unprecedented moment. Sterling, desperate to regain his footing, resorted to a personal attack. "You're a naive young man, Mr. Presley. You don't understand how the world works. You've been corrupted by influences that are best kept separate. Perhaps your success has gone to your head. You speak of decency, yet you endorse such untoward mixing." His voice stripped with disdain, Elvis let out a low, "These aren't untoward influences. They're the very soul of America. And if you can't see that, then it's not me who's knave, it's you who's blind." He paused, letting the raw honesty of his words hang in the air. His voice was no longer just firm. It held a powerful, unwavering intensity. "I'm not here to endorse mixing, Mr. Sterling. I'm here to say that talent, true talent, doesn't recognize color lines. Music doesn't recognize color lines. And if you believe it does, then you fundamentally misunderstand what music is." Mr. Sterling, completely outmaneuvered, was left speechless. His face was contorted in a mixture of fury and disbelief. He opened his mouth and closed it, unable to form a coherent response to Elvis's passionate, unyielding stance. Carefully constructed, polite facade of the event had shattered. Comfortable silence of high society had been replaced by a tense, uncomfortable truth. Elvis wasn't just standing up for himself or his music. He was standing up for the countless, often unnamed, black musicians who had shaped American sound for the respect they deserved, and for the simple principle that talent and humanity should never be judged by skin color. He looked around to stunned faces in the immediate vicinity. "I believe," Elvis stated, his voice now lower, yet resonating with quiet power, "that every person deserves respect. Every artist deserves recognition, and anyone who thinks otherwise, frankly, has no business talking about culture or standards in my presence." He took a step back, the force of his words seeming to push Mr. Sterling back as well. The conversation was over. Elvis had delivered his final decisive statement. He had laid bare the prejudice, and he had refused to back down. The ballroom moments, before a picture of serene elegance, now buzzed with the aftermath of his unexpected but deeply felt confrontation. The aftermath of Elvis's confrontation with Mr. Sterling was like a rock thrown into a placid pond. Ripples spread quickly through the ballroom. Whispers followed him like shadows as he excused himself from the stunned group, the Colonel finally shaking off his stupor to follow closely behind. "Elvis, my boy," the colonel hissed, pulling him towards a quieter. "What in the world was that? Mr. Sterling is a very influential man. We just lost a major potential investor." "Promin, Colonel," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "I don't care who he is. I wasn't going to stand there and listen to that kind of talk. Not from him, not from anyone, not when he was insulting everything I believe in and everyone who helped make me who I am." He thought of Marcus Johnson, of the countless musicians whose contributions were often overlooked or diminished. He thought of his own family, who taught him to treat everyone with respect, regardless of their background. The colonel threw his hands up in exasperation. But the career, Elvis, the public perception, this could be a disaster. He'll talk, others will talk, they'll call you a rabble-rouser, a hothead, perhaps even worse. "Let them," Elvis replied, his gaze unwavering. "If standing up for what's right makes me a rabble-rouser, then so be it. My music brings people together, Colonel. It doesn't push them apart, and I won't let anyone use their money or their status to try and divide people." He could feel eyes on them discreetly watching from doorways and across the vast room. The air was thick with speculation. He knew his actions would have consequences. Some of the high society crowd, those who agreed with Sterling's veiled prejudices, would undoubtedly turn against him. They might try to paint him as unrefined, ungrateful, perhaps even dangerous. Part of him, the part that had worked so hard to climb out of poverty, felt a twinge of fear. His career, his livelihood depended on public approval. Had he risked it all in a moment of passion? The fear was quickly overshadowed by a sense of deep satisfaction, a quiet strength that settled in his bones. He had spoken his truth. He had defended the artists who inspired him, the very soul of the music he loved, and the principle of equality he deeply believed in. He hadn't backed down, and that felt more important than any contract or social standing. "I'm leaving, Colonel," Elvis announced, turning towards the exit. "I can't stay in a room with people who think like that, or who stand by and let it happen." The colonel, seeing the unshakable resolve in his star's eyes, knew it was futile to argue further. "All right, Elvis, all right, but we have to strategize, damage control." He pulled out a handkerchief and wiped his brow. "This is going to be a mess." As Elvis walked through the opulent lobby, he felt a strange mix of emotions. Anger still simmered, but beneath it was a feeling of lightness, as if a great weight had been lifted. He hadn't compromised. He hadn't pretended. He had been himself fully and unapologetically. As he reached the front doors, a young bellhop, no older than himself, with dark skin and wide, surprised eyes, caught his gaze. The bellhop offered him a small, hesitant smile, almost imperceptible. Elvis returned it, a genuine, unforced smile. It was a silent acknowledgement, a shared understanding. In that tiny moment, Elvis knew he had done the right thing. The next day, the phones at Graceland rang off the hook. Newspapers carried veiled reports, some hinting at a heated disagreement between Elvis Presley and a prominent civic leader. Some columnists, those sympathetic to Sterling's views, subtly criticized Elvis's lack of decorum and fiery temper, suggesting he was out of his depth in high society. But then a different kind of message started to trickle in, telegrams from fan clubs, letters from ordinary people, black and white, from across the South and beyond. They might not have known the exact words spoken, but the gist was clear. Elvis had stood up for something important. He had defended the music and, by extension, the people who made it. The fallout was indeed a mess, but it wasn't the disaster the colonel had feared. It was something else entirely. It was a line drawn in the sand, a declaration of where Elvis Presley stood. And for many, it solidified his image, not just as a music idol, but as a man of true character. Back at Graceland, the familiar comfort of his home was a balm after the intensity of the ball. Elvis kicked off his dress shoes the moment he walked in, tossing his bow tie onto a nearby chair. He walked straight to the kitchen, poured himself a glass of iced tea, and sank onto a stool. The house was quiet save for the distant hum of the refrigerator. His mother, Gladys, walked in, her eyes soft with concern. "Elvis, honey? Are you all right?" The colonel called, said there was some kind of unpleasantness. Elvis sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Unpleasantness is one word for it, Mama. I had a disagreement with a man. He said some ugly things about music, about people." Gladys sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. "What kind of ugly things, son?" he explained, recounting Mr. Sterling's thinly veiled racism, his dismissal of the music and the artists that Elvis held so dear. He talked about the man's arrogance, his belief that some people were simply lesser. Gladys listened, her expression growing grave. "That kind of talk. It's just wrong, Elvis, your daddy and I. We always taught you to treat everyone with kindness, no matter their color or their money. God made us all same as each other." "That's exactly what I told him, Mama," Elvis said, his voice quiet but firm. "I couldn't just stand there and let him get away with it, not when he was talking about the music. I love the people who taught me so much. People like Marcus Johnson, like Sister Rosetta Tharpe. They gave so much. And for him to just dismiss it all." His voice trailed off, a hint of frustration still in his tone. "You did the right thing, son," Gladys said, squeezing his arm. "It might be hard, and some folks might not understand, but your conscience is clear. That's what matters most." Just then, Scotty Moore and Bill Black, his guitarist and bassist, walked in, having heard snippets from the colonel. Scotty, usually reserved, looked at Elvis with a mixture of concern and pride. "Heard you stirred up a hornet's nest, Boss Scotty," said a slight smile playing on his lips. "Colonel's got white hair over it." "He'll get over it," Elvis said, a wry grin finally breaking through his serious expression. "But yeah, I guess I did. Couldn't help it, Scotty. This guy was talking down about the blues, about gospel, about the very roots of what we do, and about the folks who play it." Bill, ever direct, nodded. "Good on you, Elvis. Takes guts to stand up to folks like that, especially when they got money and power. Most people just smile and nod." "Well, I ain't most people," Elvis declared, a spark of his usual rebellious charm returning. "And I sure ain't gonna pretend to be. This music, it's in my blood. It's in our blood, and it comes from everywhere, from the fields, from the churches, from the juke joints. It comes from black folks and white folks. Anyone who tries to say otherwise just doesn't get it." He looked at Scotty and Bill. "Remember those nights in the studio just trying to find that sound, trying to get that feeling that came from dissecting where it all came from? It came from listening to Arthur Crudup, to Big Mama Thornton. That ain't something you can just dismiss because you don't like the color of someone's skin." Scotty nodded slowly. "You're right, Elvis. It's the truth. We wouldn't be doing what we're doing without all those influences. We built our sound on it," Bill added. "And a lot of those folks never got the recognition they deserved, or the money good to see someone with your platform speaking up." Elvis felt a profound sense of relief. Their support meant the world to him. They understood. They were musicians too, and they knew the truth of what he was saying. This wasn't just about a heated argument, it was about the very foundation of his art and his character. "It felt good, though," Elvis admitted, leaning back on the stool. "Standing my ground. I don't know what comes next, what those folks will say or do, but I know I did what was right, and that's more important than a few fancy invitations or a good image." His mother reached out and squeezed his hand again, her eyes shining with pride. "That's my boy," she murmured. "Always had a good heart." Quiet conversation continued, filled with understanding and affirmation. In the comfortable embrace of his home and the people who truly knew him, Elvis found the strength to face whatever the fallout might bring. He had spoken his truth, and that truth was deeply rooted in kindness, respect, and the universal power of music. The news, as the colonel predicted, spread like wildfire. At first, it was whispered rumors in high society circles, often twisted to portray Elvis as arrogant, ill-mannered, and impulsive. Presley's temper. An unfortunate scene. Rock and roll star loses his cool. These were the headlines in some of the more conservative local papers. Mr. Sterling, a man with significant connections, ensured his version of events got amplified. But then something unexpected happened. The truth, in its own stubborn way, began to emerge. A junior reporter who had been lingering near the scene overheard fragments of the argument and wrote a more nuanced piece. A few of the less prejudiced guests, quietly impressed by Elvis's courage, let slip details to their friends. And crucially, a young, aspiring journalist from a smaller, more progressive newspaper in Memphis, who had always admired Elvis's inclusive musical spirit, pursued the story with tenacity. Her article, published a few days later, didn't sensationalize. It simply stated the facts. Elvis Presley had challenged a prominent businessman's racist remarks about the origins of American music and the contributions of black artists. It quoted not verbatim, but the essence of Elvis's words. His insistence that music knew no color, that talent was universal, and that respect was immediate and powerful. While some of the elite still scoffed, a tidal wave of support began to pour in. It came from his loyal fans, who saw their idol stand for something more than just entertainment. They flooded radio stations with requests for his songs and called newspapers to express their admiration. More significantly, it came from the black community in Memphis and across the South. For years, they had seen Elvis, a white man, openly embrace their music, perform their songs, and credit their artists. But this was different. This was a direct public stand against overt prejudice, risking his own career for a principle. Letters arrived at Graceland daily. Some were simple thank you notes. Others were deeply personal, describing years of silent suffering under the weight of racism and expressing profound gratitude that someone with Elvis's reach had spoken up. Black churches held special prayers for him. Musicians, many of whom Elvis had admired from afar, sent messages of solidarity. One afternoon, a telegram arrived. It was from a group of prominent black musicians and community leaders in Nashville, thanking him for his unwavering courage in the face of bigotry and acknowledging his true understanding of the diverse tapestry of American music. Elvis, reading it in his living room, felt a lump form in his throat. This, he thought, was worth more than 1,000 fancy invitations. Colonel Parker, initially still in crisis management mode, watched the unfolding public reaction with a mixture of bewilderment and grudging admiration. "Well, I'll be," he muttered to Elvis one morning, shaking his head at a stack of positive fan mail. "Seems like you accidentally did something good for the brand. People are calling you a hero, Elvis. A champion of the common man." Elvis just shrugged, a small, genuine smile on his face. "I just said what was true, Colonel. It wasn't about being a hero. It was about being decent." The ripple effect wasn't just in public opinion. It subtly changed things around Elvis. More of his band members and staff, seeing his unwavering stance, felt comfortable, speaking their minds on similar issues. There was a new unspoken understanding within his circle. Prejudice was not tolerated. The incident also served as a stark reminder to him of the power of his platform. He wasn't just a singer anymore. He was a voice, and people were listening to what he had to say, not just what he sang. This realization deepened his sense of purpose. He had always loved music, but now he understood its greater potential. It wasn't just for entertainment. It was for unity. It was for challenging the status quo. The disaster the Colonel had feared had, in fact, become something entirely different. It was a reaffirmation of Elvis's true character, shining a light on his integrity and his genuine belief in equality. And in a time when such public stands were rare and risky, it cemented his place in the hearts of many, not just as the king of rock and roll, but as a king of kindness and courage. The positive backlash from Elvis's stand at the governor's ball was a revelation. It wasn't just fan mail and telegrams. Real changes began to unfold. Other public figures who might have previously stayed silent found a new courage. One morning, the phone rang at Graceland. It was a renowned black gospel singer, Reverend James Clemens, a man Elvis had long admired. He spoke with a rich, booming voice, full of warmth. "Mr. Presley," the Reverend began, "I just wanted to call and express my profound gratitude for your actions. At that ball, it took real guts. For too long, the contributions of our people to American music, to American culture, have been deliberately ignored or dismissed. Your words coming from a man with your influence. Reverend, it was just the truth. I wouldn't be who I am without the music I heard in your churches or in the clubs on Beale Street." The Reverend chuckled. "Well, we always knew you had soul, son. But knowing you have a strong moral compass to match, that's truly something special. We're holding a benefit concert next month, raising Prolme." This invitation was a stark contrast to the stifling atmosphere of the governor's ball. This was real. This was about making a difference. Word of Elvis's acceptance spread, energizing the community. The benefit concert became a symbol of unity, attracting people from all walks of life, all races. When Elvis stepped onto that stage, not in a dazzling concert outfit, but a simple suit, he wasn't just a star, he was a bridge. He performed a few of his hits, but he also joined the Reverend Clemens in a powerful gospel number, their voices blending in harmony, an undeniable testament to the universal power of music. Crowd roared, not just for his fame, but for his integrity. It was a truly heartwarming sight. A packed hall filled with smiling faces, all brought together by music and a shared sense of hope. The incident at the ball also opened doors to new creative avenues for Elvis. He found himself thinking more deeply about the lyrics he sang, about the messages he conveyed. He started working on a new song, a ballad with a bluesy undertone inspired by the whole experience. It wasn't explicitly political, but it spoke of unity, of overcoming division, of the way music could heal and connect. He spent hours in the studio perfecting the melody, pouring his heart into the lyrics. Scotty and Bill noticed a new depth in his approach. "This one's got a different kind of feel," Elvis Scotty observed one night. "More soul, if that's possible." "Yeah," Elvis replied, adjusting the mic. "It's got a piece of me in it that wasn't there before. A piece of all those folks who stand up for what's right." Meanwhile, Mr. Sterling, the man who had sparked the whole controversy, found himself facing an unexpected backlash. While his closest allies still supported him, some of his business partners, worried about their public image, distanced themselves. A few charitable organizations quietly removed him from their boards. His name, once synonymous with respectability, was now associated with bigotry. Thanks to Elvis's public defiance, it wasn't a complete ruin, but it was a significant dent in his carefully crafted reputation. Justice, in its own slow way, was being served. Elvis, however, didn't dwell on Sterling's misfortune. He was too busy looking forward. The governor's ball had been a turning point, not just for his public image, but for his own sense of purpose. He understood now, more than ever, that his voice, whether singing a rock and roll anthem or speaking a quiet truth, had immense power. He used it to champion causes he believed in, to shine a light on injustices, and most importantly, to continue creating music that celebrated the rich, diverse tapestry of American sound. He was still the king of rock and roll, but now he was also something more. A man who put his heart, his integrity, and his belief in equality above all else. His music had always brought people together, but now his actions did too. Years passed, and Elvis Presley continued to rise, his music echoing across the globe, transcending genres and generations. He became an icon, a legend, but the incident at the governor's ball, though often overshadowed by his massive fame, remained a quiet, powerful thread in the tapestry of his story. It wasn't a single event that defined him, but rather it revealed a core part of his character that would endure. People remembered the flashy jumpsuits, the hip swiveling moves, the incredible voice. But those who knew the full story remembered the young man in the ill-fitting tuxedo, who refused to back down when confronted with prejudice. The community center that Reverend Clemens had been building with Elvis's initial help and ongoing support, Thrive, became a vibrant hub of music lessons, community events, and a place where children of all backgrounds learned and played together. Elvis would sometimes make unannounced visits, sitting in on jam sessions, quietly listening to young musicians and offering words of encouragement. He never forgot his promise to Marcus Johnson, occasionally showing up at small Beale Street clubs just to listen and soak in the raw, authentic sound that had inspired him. His music continued to embody the very fusion he had defended that night. He blended gospel with rock, blues with country, always acknowledging the diverse roots that fed his artistry. Critics tried to categorize him, but Elvis, through his sound and his actions, defied simple labels. He was a true American artist, drawing from every well and sharing it with the world. The image of Elvis as a man of integrity, a champion of fairness, grew stronger over time. In a society grappling with deep-seated racial tensions, his stance provided a beacon of hope for many. He proved that even someone at the pinnacle of fame could and should use their voice for good. His records continued to sell millions, his concerts filled stadiums, but the King title now felt different. It wasn't just about his musical reign. It was about the kingdom of kindness he helped to cultivate through his example. He showed that true royalty wasn't measured by crowns or wealth, but by the courage to stand up for what's right, to treat everyone with dignity. Years later, an interviewer once asked him about that night, about the controversy at the governor's ball. Elvis, older and wiser but with the same sparkle in his eyes, just smiled. Controversy, he mused, and anyone who tries to tell you different, well, they just ain't listening with their heart. His words resonated. They were simple, profound, and deeply rooted in the moral compass that had guided him since his humble beginnings. The story became part of his legend, a heartwarming reminder that the king of rock and roll was at his core, a man who believed in the power of respect, the beauty of diversity, and the undeniable truth that music, like humanity, is richer when it embraces every shade of the rainbow. His reaction to that racist comment was swift and decisive, but its legacy was long-lasting and eternally heartwarming.